citizen.
Out of many
We are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast, where each week we bring you wonderful meetings and discussions on nonviolence, action days, and at least one day a month, we have incredible speakers, solutionaries, who are not just telling us all the terrible problems of the planet, but how we can really make a difference and change them. Well, today we have an amazing change agent. We have Rivera Sun, who is, well, as a change maker, she works with the Campaign for Nonviolence, World Beyond War, the Backbone Campaign, edits nonviolent news, is planning a whole series of nonviolence events, has a website that we all signed up for, and a number of us did the actions where we can all take part in nonviolent actions all across the country. But today, we're going to be talking with her about another side of her life that to me is even more crucial and necessary for humanity's survival, and that is that she is a cultural creative, and describes herself as a protest novelist. But these novels are really creating incredible worlds. For example, I've just finished reading her amazing book, The Way Between, and it's an amazing story. Well, I also bought copies for my kids and grandkids, and my granddaughter loved that they had a map at the beginning, could help her figure it out. She loved getting into the characters; they became so rich for her, and the story just drew her in like magic. And what this does is it kind of takes all the crucial things that we've been learning in conflict resolution and so on, and draws it into stories that really take us on a journey. And we find, let me start just by asking you, in a world that seems to be plunging madly toward doing ourselves in, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist's clock, of course, shows us 90 seconds away from a midnight of environmental destruction, nuclear destruction, really terminating life on Earth. Sometimes in the midst of such terrible threats, the only thing that can save us is a story. Why is storytelling so crucial for humanity?
Thanks for having me on the show and starting with that question. I love it. I think of storytelling as one of humanity's oldest magics and technologies. It is how we get our beautiful minds to be able to stretch beyond the here and now where we are. And we do this for all sorts of reasons. We do it to remember, we do it to learn, we do it to imagine the places we want to get to when we're not standing in them already. And to me, we need those skills right now when we face multiple existential crises here on planet Earth, and the future of humanity is not so certain. If we want to have a future, we need to actively be involved in envisioning that future and also envisioning the path toward that we're going to take to get there, right? We're going to need both of those things.
Wow. Well, let's just talk a little bit about your book, The Way Between. Now, essentially, or maybe I should let you summarize it, and then I'll tell you what grabbed me about it. Why don't you tell us briefly, what is the story of The Way Between about?
Sure. Well, The Way Between is the story of a young girl, 11 years old, who winds up becoming the apprentice to a great warrior. But he's not going to teach her how to use violence and how to swing a sword. No, he's going to teach her the lost and forgotten art of the way between. And the way between in their world is a little bit like a blend of Aikido or Capoeira, and then everything we might call nonviolence and peace building. And so she sets off to learn this, and soon enough she needs those skills in order to stop a brewing war that's rising up because the two warring nations share one heir to the throne who's been missing since they were born. So it's an adventure, it's a fantasy story, and really what I did is I took the genre that I grew up loving, fantasy, and challenged the idea that we needed violence and war in the middle of those stories in order for them to be exciting. I love The Lord of the Rings. I loved Alana the Lioness series, the Chronicles of Narnia. But you know, at this point in time, we know we can tell better stories. We know that the real heroes out there aren't always involved or often involved in war. They're the people standing up for rights, dignity, social change, and overwhelmingly, they're doing this using nonviolent action. So let's start telling stories about people like that.
Wow. Well, that is so crucial, and humanity needs that news story. And so, so what I loved in your book is that you had this monastery where it's very much like, what we see in society today. People are being trained in war. They're all thinking war. They learn the skills of war. They're heroic. The young people are growing up with hero images and trying to dream of it. And then this kind of like out of the wilds comes this native girl with red hair, like Gary Davis, the hero of our movie, had red hair. Comes this girl with red hair who uh, doesn't know who she is. She's a lost orphan, and he begins to train her in what they call altar, is this force of thrust and fight and shoot and kill, and azar is this disarming force. I loved your illusion that it's like water that slips between and slides and can get past the worst challenges without facing and confronting them, but rather being like that water that takes them into the flow and turns them around. And so take us into a little bit of the feeling for who she is and how you related to this character, and how she how out of your experience gave birth to amazing uh, this amazing new way.
Yeah. Well, you know, I grew up on those violent fantasy stories when I was a young girl in the 80s and 90s. It was very in vogue for, especially for women, to be sword slingers. We had, you know, Xena, we had people like Alana the Lioness, and a whole bunch of other female heroes who were picking up violence to get their way. And I thought that was great. I loved the heroism of it, honestly. I was really excited about that. Well, as I grew older, that's when I started to notice that, you know, when I was a first year of college was when 9/11 happened. And then the next year we entered Iraq illegally, and then Afghanistan. And to me, the idea that we're going to find these heroes in the military didn't hold much water anymore. And you know, I also had young niece and nephews who are growing up, and I wanted to know, what are they going to read when they get old enough to read the Hunger Games, right? Where's the alternative for them? So when I started to learn more about nonviolent action, that's when I really wanted to weave that into a really compelling, exciting story, something that grips the mind, grips the imagination, and helps us imagine ourselves or the young people as they're reading as that kind of heroine or hero. And Ariara isn't a saint. She's hot-tempered, impetuous. She jumps into things without looking. She aggravates the bully that she has a problem with in the middle of this book, right? So she's not an innocent getting picked on by this bully. She's certainly doing a bit of aggravating herself, which a lot of young people find themselves in that situation. And so the idea was to give a kind of framework with which we can stand up to bullies without becoming bullies ourselves. And I know that's something that you're very passionate about as well, Arthur. And so, you know, I wanted a heroine, a young heroine who had all the action, all the excitement, all the energy that we love in those typical fantasy action heroes, but did it with a really different purpose, and did it boldly and bravely, and set out not to win a war, but to stop a war.
Beautiful. And you did that so well, and you really captured that character. Now, the character that she confronted, this Broll, who was just a terrible bully to her and did all the worst things you can imagine bullies doing to someone. At some point in her story, she discovers that that was because he watched his own parents and family get sliced to death by someone who had red hair like her, and she brought that she triggered that hot button inside him. In our bully-proof shield, we look for understanding unicorn tells us how to understand what triggers our hot buttons and the other persons. And when she understood that, um, then uh, but then she used Aikido kind of techniques to turn around his violence and sort of pin him down. But then I was waiting for the final conclusion of that. As soon as I saw you brought Broll back in, I said, "Aha! This is going to be the final resolution with Broll." And then she says she understood that she didn't actually complete that. She didn't do the closure with him, but then she did. I didn't see her do it in the story. And I said, "Wait a minute, where's that part of the story? I want to see her turn Broll into being like her." She has a close friend who's just got one leg and who becomes her like key confidant. And I wanted him to become part of her inner circle and drawn in from being the bad guy to being someone helping her in her final effort. And I didn't see that.
Yeah. Well, yes, everyone wants Brawl to become Minley, who is her one-legged friend, who is quite an extraordinary character that everyone is super fond of. Very smart, very clever. But Brawl has a different journey, and it is a series, so there are going to be 7 books in the series. 5 are out already. And I really wanted to leave Brawl and Ariara's relationship in this kind of like stalemate position where she hasn't actually succeeded in doing all of the transformational work. She's only 11 years old in this book. And while I have seen 11-year-olds actually make that transformation within people they're in conflict with, I thought it would be very interesting if she doesn't go the full yard, right? She doesn't go the full work of restorative practices and reconciliation work, because it can come back around to haunt her later. And so
Aha.
Brawl is on his own journey. I won't do any spoilers, but you may see him again in an upcoming book. And I think
Aha.
it's a
Now
great
I
metaphor for a lot of the things that we see around not just individual bullies, but systems or structures of injustice, where we get a law passed to stop, let's say, segregation in schools. But if we don't do the full work of racial healing, we're still struggling with racism as it comes up in another form. And the same goes for war, right? We can have a ceasefire that just stops the bombs from falling. But if we don't go the full work of resolving the underlying conflict and then restoring the relationships that have been broken and traumatized through these acts of violence, then the likelihood that we're going to see our countries in another cycle of violence is very high. So we're going to have an opportunity to explore that metaphorically through Ariar and Brawl's relationship coming around.
Wow. Now I have to read more books in your series, and that answers perfectly my question that was left hanging for exactly the reason that we need to find that and discover that incredible how that happened. So, and that is such an incredible, wonderful parallel that you've just made to the world where we think we've solved something when we get one thing done, and we're so proud of ourselves, and yet it comes back around because we haven't done that fundamental healing work. And you use the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but in a literary way, where we see that come through in her stories. Um, Tell us a little bit more about your books that take us on that journey to that kind of healing. Where will we find that way that we make that longer term resolution?
Mm. Well, Ariara has other books in her journey. She goes on to help resolve a labor dispute around migrant justice in The Lost Heir. She works with a group of women to restore their voices to the song, as she puts, or they put it in their culture, to rebalance the genders in the power-making structure in order to prevent war. We know that there's a marked correlation between the involvement of women in peace agreements and the upholding of those peace agreements. So I wanted to reflect that a little bit in the story. And then one of the places where we do see a lot of that healing work happen is actually in her fourth book, when she's got a following of friends and allies, intergenerational, and they start their own version of nonviolent peace force, right?
Hmm.
So groups of people trained in their world, it's called the way between, but using it in teams to de-escalate violence, to do restorative practices, to hold listening circles, to help people in the border zone do the healing work from the cycles, the traumatizing cycles of violence. So what I've really tried to do with the series, and I'm still doing in many ways, is put together the beautiful, immense framework of nonviolence, peace building, restorative practices, conflict resolution skills, and show that these things are not separate. They are all linked together. And at this point in time, we have studied and researched them enough to understand the comprehensive vision of it and how we should be applying this systemically and structurally in our own society to help humanity break its cycle of propelling itself into violence, right? Right now, we invest trillions of dollars each year in one form of conflict management called the military-industrial complex.
Hmm.
That's just the US alone, right? And so we get what we pay for, right? If we're going to pour all this money into guns and bombs and tanks and nukes, we're going to have a world at war forever. I see on the call today, we have some of our colleagues from World Beyond War, and I'm on their advisory board. And, they have really put together these ideas as well in their book, an alternative global security system. And it really points out to us that there are other options available, and they're not just sky in the pie ideas. They are pragmatic. They are tested in the field. They have decades or hundreds of year-long track records. And if we took them seriously as cultures and societies, we could really transform our world. So this goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning, Arthur, that the job of a storyteller like me is to help people imagine that this is possible. Ariara doesn't live in a utopia. She doesn't live in the world beyond war. She lives in the world of war, and like us, is working to carve out space in which another way is possible, and carve out space for people to see that these skills that they call the way between offer viable alternatives for keeping everyone safer in their world. Ariara's world is a completely fictional world. She doesn't have nuclear weapons. She doesn't have fighter jets. They're back in the days of swords and arrows. And I think somehow it helps us abstract or conceptualize these ideas in a deeper way. It helps us believe that they're possible, and then makes us a little more willing to see if we could apply them in our real life as well.
Mm. And we see so many parallels of that in the book, where the monk academy, where they're training these warriors, once they capture that third way, that way of Azure, they the big money people don't want to keep the monastery going. If you're not going to be training fighters to protect us from those horrible bad guys, we're not giving you money. But then we realize that they're all just manipulating folks to get the money. That it doesn't matter which side's the bad guys. And so and then it's very interesting in your book to see the alternative she develops of how that really good parallels for how we develop an alternative economy. So you touch on so many crucial issues with the power of story that young people like my grandchildren can enjoy and have fun with, and yet plant these seeds in them. Right now, we're really at a precipice. We're facing a time uh, where our world's teetering on the brink, where environmental scientists say, even if we just continue what we're doing with the kind of people trying to do we had a wonderful podcast with the key people working on the COP conferences, at the UN, trying to control climate change. And even in the best of worlds, we're veering dangerously close to terminating life on Earth, not only through that, but then through nuclear war as well. Even more scary at the moment, what's happening and how little attention is being paid to that. And yet, at the same time, we're also now teetering on the edge of what might be. We're narrowly trying to avert a plunge into an even deeper darkness that could really spell doom for our planet. And as that happens, there's a tendency to move toward violence when something crazy happens in the political world. And how can your story, the Dandelion Insurrection, show us another way of dealing with the challenges that we might be facing right here in the United States?
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. I share a lot of your concerns for humanity, our country, and the planet at this time. Like we said, we are facing compounding crises. It seems every month or so I wake up and say, what, if we didn't have enough already? We had to invent some new existential crisis? And I think one of the things I've tried to do in all my work, not just the novels, but also in my work with Nonviolence News, is make sure that I keep the stories that I'm telling connected to three things: the problem, the solution, and the people working toward the solution. And if you get those three things in the stories that you're telling, whether it's a short post or a tweet, whether it's a newsletter to your friends, whether it's how you're talking about the issues, I think you'll find that the crises that we face are not so overwhelming because you're anchored and grounded in how can I be part of the solution? As Joan Baez said, action is the antidote to despair. So in 2013, which seems a lifetime ago, I started writing a book called The Dandelion Insurrection. And I started with a simple premise. What if the United States government was not actually being run by elected officials, but really was pandering to corporations and rich people? No, that's not so speculative, right? I think we all know that this is kind of a problem in our system. So then I posited the second thing. What if there was a nonviolent movement for change that rose up to stop corporate power and to stop what they called a hidden corporate dictatorship? Um, that's about as far as I really got in the beginning. At the time, I didn't actually know that much about nonviolent struggle. What I did know was that my father was a conscientious objector to the Vietnam War who helped other CEOs and people who were drafted get out of the country and get to Canada to safety. So I knew that he would probably be quite mad at me, spiritually, he had passed on by then, if I had, posited a violent revolution. So, not knowing how to get my characters out of the mess that I had put them in, I did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I Googled it. How to bring down dictators nonviolently. I literally did a search for it. And I thought, this is so speculative. Maybe Ursula Le Guin wrote about it. Maybe, some wacky fan blog has made some short stories about this. Little did I know I would get like 4 million hits back. And that there is not just a robust field of writings on this, but that people around the world have been doing this for decades. People have used nonviolent action to end dictatorships of all shapes and sizes over and over and over again. It is truly extraordinary. They did it in Chile, they had done it in Bolivia, they've done it in, they ousted the Soviet Union from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia with it. Czechoslovakia had a nonviolent revolution. I could go on. I actually sat down and counted 40 of them the other day, but there's many more than that. So I started to study. I started to learn from these amazing people around the world who had done exactly what I wanted to write about. And as I learned more about the strategy of nonviolent movements, I started to revise the book so that I could show my movement responding to the ways that the hidden corporate dictatorship would try to stop them. And what came out was a pretty compelling and interesting story about what might speculatively happen if we did that in the United States. Now, decades later, what I found is that some things have come true, some things seem like they're about to come true, and some things didn't come true at all in my speculations of what might unfold. But certainly I have seen that this kind of a story catches people's imagination and helps them imagine themselves not as passive victims to the political situation, but engaged and active, aware, alert, and alive human beings with power and agency in themselves and with other people. And that is what nonviolent action offers us, is tangible, direct power to reshape the world that we live in for hopefully the betterment of all.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned those powerful nonviolent movements, and of course the work of Gene Sharp that catalogs all those, with the Einstein Institute catalogs all the techniques, and that's been a handbook for so many of these people doing nonviolent revolutions. My grandfather came from Lithuania. He also was the kind of character you'd write about in your books. He had an incredible story where in the vaudeville days, they had this huge, big, powerful bear, 8 feet high, but they had him muzzled and his claws clipped, and they would offer somebody $50 if anybody could get him on his back. And big men came and big men went down. Every time Big Jim would win, over and over, every time. My grandfather, who was a little guy but really strong, vegetable vendor on the street, he went up there to the vaudeville stage, and in 2 minutes had the bear flat on his back, and the crowd was roaring and cheering. They couldn't believe it. And the owner said, "I'm not going to give you the $50." And my grandfather said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you cheated." "What do you mean I cheated?" "You tickled the bear." uh, you know, Azure. He used Azure. And so it went to, there's newspaper articles about it. It went to court. There were cartoons in the paper and all this. And the court ruled that he had to pay him the $50. There was nothing in the rules that said you couldn't tickle the bear. So, any case, there's an incredible power that can come from figuring out these kind of nonviolent solutions.
Many of us have heard about the coup that almost happened in Algeria, but after that, the two ruling parties couldn't agree on anything, and that's when they almost had a civil war, and indeed they started fighting. But the Algerians had just gone through 7 years of this horribly bloody war of independence, and they were like, no more war, certainly not against ourselves. And so they did things like they laid in the street in front of the tanks and stopped them. They stood in front of the army barracks and refused to let people come out. They held mass demonstrations. The unions went on strike. The workers mobilized against this, and they stopped the war within I think it was a month's time. And what's even more remarkable and tragic, but remarkable, is 1,000 people died in this period. Usually when violence starts to happen, it becomes a cycle, right? One side gets someone killed, so the other side feels like they need to kill some of them, and then the cycle goes back and forth. So the fact that, like in Estonia and Latvia, the people could hold strong to nonviolent action and refuse to descend into war is incredible. And this is the kind of thing that inspires my stories. And it's really why I write them, is to make it more credible in our minds, to make credible in our culture what people are literally doing all over the world. I think that one of the things I've learned with World Beyond War is that has not been around forever, right? It really, the earliest evidence of organized violence in groups is only from about, I think it's 12,000 or 15,000 BC. And that may seem like a long time, 10,000 BC. And so that may seem like a long time, 12,000 years. But it's just a blip on the human timeline. We've had dogs, statues, religion, boats, weaving, fishing nets, fire, paintings, all have been around far longer, sometimes tens of thousands of years longer than war. So if we existed as humans with rich cultures before war, we can do that after war. And I think it's conversations like what we're having today, the work that I'm doing in storytelling, and everyone else who's doing a similar thing, that's going to get humanity over this very bad habit that we've adopted, that this cycle that we felt that we are stuck in. I don't believe we are stuck in it forever, and I believe that we can end our addiction to war and replace it with these very tangible, viable, realistic, and pragmatic alternatives. And that when we look at nonviolent struggle, it is actually a really great example of how that's already happening. We know that the rise of nonviolent movements to oust dictators or governmental regimes is actually replacing civil war worldwide. And that is truly remarkable.
Well, and it is so remarkable. Now, there's two things that come together here, and that is that President Landsbergis, who led the Singing Revolution in Lithuania, 2 weeks after he declared independence from Russia, the Soviet Union as it was called then, Gary Davis issued him a world passport. And when I went to see him back in Lithuania, I brought him his renewed passport, and he was so thrilled to have it. He said, I had just declared independence from the USSR. I had a Soviet diplomatic passport and I wanted to travel, but I wasn't going to declare travel with this passport from a country I declared independence from. He said, I took the world passport, and when I went to the border, I gave it to him and they stamped it. He thought that was the funniest and greatest thing that he'd been able to use that world passport. And the same thing in Czechoslovakia, where their president said that the world passport was his only passport. So that leads me to another key question. That is the connection. I mean, it seems to me there are two key alternatives to violence that can turn things around in the world. And both, by the way, need new stories to tell them, because the whole reason we have all this violence really is because we're telling the wrong story. And if we told the right story, the right stories can turn this around. One thing is nonviolent action, but the other is for society to agree on a regime of rules above the nations that divide us. Gary Davis points out in our movie that once we, inside countries with one government, we don't fight wars. We might have crimes, but in every single jurisdiction except the global, killing people is illegal. Well, if we simply make killing people and raping and murder illegal at the global level, then you don't treat some soldiers coming in as a reason to go back and bomb and kill a whole bunch of other people. You treat it as a criminal justice system. You handle it. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us about any of your stories that help lift our vision to not only use nonviolent struggle, but also to envisioning a world in which we've come together above the nations that divide us.
Yeah, well, actually, in the very first book I wrote, my baby book, when I was a baby writer, Steam Drills, Treadmills, and Shooting Stars, is a story of climate action and a group of people in Appalachia who are trying to stop mountaintop removal. There's one character who has this realization, as his colleagues are pushing for them to have a revolution for the earth, right? The earth is singing her revolution and she needs us to come to her defense. It can't just be, we're going to stand up for this group of humans or that group of humans. We also have to stand up for the ecosystem that keeps us all alive. And so it really kind of blows his mind, this character. And he starts to think, well, okay, so I'm a citizen of the United States. And I was born and raised here, and we have a Declaration of Independence and a Bill of Rights, but I mean, the earth doesn't stop at the borders of the United States. The ocean just keeps flowing onward, and the rivers keep going, and the land keeps rolling. And so am I not also a citizen of the earth? The whole earth, the whole world. And what does that even mean to be a citizen of the earth? And for him, it's this incredible almost spiritual revelation. And it is a way of really considering, like, what does it mean to be a human being on a planet that is in peril, that needs us to take responsibility for every group and affiliation of humanity that we are part of. So even as we get those world passports and we support this idea of not necessarily being so attached to nation states, to remember that one of our sacred duties in doing so is to care for humanity and to care for the earth, right? Already we have a group of beings, they like to claim they're people, but they're not, corporations who already enjoy great privileges on the global scene, where they use a lot of international law to amass resources, to take what they want, to arrange things for their own benefit, right? And so they already are kind of transcending national borders. But we as humans need to catch up in a way, and not for the nefarious reasons that they do it, but for these really beautiful reasons that we share as human beings, with a great love for our species and all the other species that are entwined with our very existence.
Wow, I love that. We'll have to read that. Steam drills, there was John Henry with that steam drill drilling into the mountain coal, and treadmill. We've all been sort of caught on that crazy treadmill that system takes us on, and shooting stars that can shoot us into that future in which humanity rises above that and becomes one. Wow. How can we get your amazing books?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit riverasun.com and you will find links to all of my books. That is the best way to get them directly from the author and to circumvent, mega corporations. If you're listening internationally, especially there's a couple ways that we can work with you to reduce the shipping costs. So please reach out directly through our contact page on our website. Of course, you can find my books on all the major book publishers, but if you happen to have a local bookstore, go down to the counter and ask them to special order it for you, and they can do that as well.
Beautiful. Well, that's so wonderful. And one of the things I look forward to, because you are such an incredible story writer, is our long-term vision here is to create a series of movies, series, books, video games, toys, a whole transmedia series in which we young people can go from this insane world into the world of our dreams and take them on that journey. And we hope you, as a wonderful writer, will be an ongoing collaborator with us as we take that journey. So thank you so much for answering my questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Melanie Bennett, who is going to see if there's some other questions for you.
Yes, thank you, Arthur. My goodness, yes, so important to let people have a little window into this wonderful future that we're going to create, because we can. And it's so hopeful and wonderful to read your book. I loved The Way Between and the Dandelion Insurrection. And my goodness, I'm just going to go and read more. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for opening people's eyes and letting us have the joy of seeing how we can resolve things without violence. Which, for our first question, let's go to David Gallup, please. David, go right ahead.
Hi, so nice to meet you, Rivera. I guess my question really pertains to what you think as a writer about when people in the peace movement use words like a fight, like fighting for justice, or combating violations of rights, or tackling or beating. Me as a human rights lawyer and also a small peace activist, I get frustrated when I see those words used when people are making peace initiatives. So I guess my question is, what do you think about using those sort of words of mostly linked to violence in discussing peaceful initiatives? But is there a way to maybe reclaim those words as peacemakers, or should we just find different words?
I think it's very situational and we should be strategic about it. Because we live in a culture of violence and war, a lot of those words are very easily understandable to many, many people, right? So sometimes translating the work that we're doing into language that's understandable makes sense. On the other hand, if we're just casually relying on the cultural violence framework, we're also not transforming it. So anywhere that we have an opportunity to challenge and transform it, to use a different metaphor, to invoke a different modality of being in the world, I think it's to our benefit to do so. So I think just being reflective a little bit about what's appropriate in what situation can make us more skillful in how we're using our language and for what reason.
Excellent. Yes. And now we'd like to go to Richard Denton. Richard, please go right ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you, Arthur and Rivera, of course. I'm wondering again how to change society. Quanta was on earlier and asked the question, how can all the various peace organizations come together to have a major influence? I think what we've seen after COVID is that we're all in our own little silos, doing our own little aspect of trying to create peace. Groups who are against nuclear weapons, people who are, again, in Rotary, of course, positive peace means, drilling wells for water, helping women and children, that sort of thing, fighting disease. But as opposed to looking at negative peace, which is addressing the issues of war per se. So how can we do this, unite together? And in particular, what role can Rotary play in creating peace in the world, to work against the negative piece of war and violence?
Two very good questions. For the first one about how we can work together more, I think, there's this vision that we all kind of like hope to have of like the one big union of all the peace movements. And what I found is that's actually really challenging and really tricky. But what is actually a little more achievable and would be transformational in our movement culture is to have all of the heads of our movements and staff members on our organizations regularly get into the habit of reaching out to 6 to 10 other organizations to work together on projects, right? So if we're presenting webinars, we never do it on our own. We do it all together, particularly free webinars, right? Where there's no conflict of interest monetarily. If we're planning a week of actions, to talk to our other organizations about, can we do this all at the same time, right? Do we have to do like overlapping weeks that our people will show up to, or like, can we synchronize our watches? Some groups and organizations are much better at this than others, but I think it's a discipline that we can all get into. And the same is true for us as on the ground activists. If we're planning a street demonstration, to get in the habit of not just reaching out to our email list, but to going and building a little peace with other people who might share some common cause. Maybe they'll say no, but maybe they'll say yes. And what happens is when we all start doing this, we get into an ecosystem of movements that's like mycelium in the forest, where we're exchanging nutrients and energies and ideas. And we have that network connection, so that when we have a flashpoint, like, oh, the US president is about to push that button to drop that nuclear bomb, right? We have the network whereby we can call upon each other to come into action together, even if it's not a top-down hierarchy. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. The other thing about Rotary, I don't know a great answer for you. I know a little bit of Rotary's work, and I love the way that they work on positive and negative peace and understand the connection of social justice and access to human resources as a pillar of maintaining positive peace and preventing negative peace from occurring. So I think I don't have a great answer for you in terms of Rotary International. I know Rotary US has a lot of room to catch up with its international colleagues, and I think that might be a really interesting place to work, right? That Rotary US tends to have a closer relationship to the military, veterans, and people who are unwilling to critique militarism, let's put it that way. And so bridging that gap is a great goal for US Rotary, I think. And maybe I'm wrong. This is just an outside perspective.
No, I think you're certainly right. I think ICAN, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, did try to bring in many groups and got the Nobel Peace Prize for that, and for the creation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And certainly, I think Rotary generally works on the positive piece, but doesn't address the negative piece, i.e., how to end wars, create ceasefires, and to diffuse war situations. We have done it with one of our past international presidents from Sri Lanka, Ravi Ravindran, did create a ceasefire during the Tamil civil war in Sri Lanka to vaccinate children against polio. So, I mean, that is one example, but we certainly could be doing the same now in Gaza or Ukraine, etc., around the world.
Exactly. And so grateful for you, Richard, because that's what we need. We need people inside Rotary being brave enough to say, hey, we're not going to stand for war. So thank you for what you're doing. And now that leads me to Anne, who's incredible as well. Anne, please go ahead with your question.
Rivera, thank you so much. I got your emails, so I read all your examples. I'm inspired every day. I get that. Have you heard of anybody trying to address nuclear weapons abolition with nonviolence? I mean, all of us use petitioning, pamphlets, those kinds of things, but I don't see any inspiration coming out of that. I don't see any excitement. I don't see any collaboration. I try to imagine, could we identify all the nuclear weapons and sell them off? You
Yeah,
know, I like concrete action, and we need to get beyond the mouthing of horrible consequences to being playful. The one playful thing I see is that there is a little 4-minute video on how to dismantle a nuclear weapon, but we need to take it further. Do you have any examples that you've run into of what you thought was a good way to start kicking along the path of abolition?
I do think that every historic advance that we've made around nuclear weapons, whether that's been test bans, whether that's been stopping nuclear power, which is completely related to nuclear weapons, whether that's, slowing down the rollout of the dial-a-ton nuclear weapons, whether it's actually getting people to not drop nuclear bombs, has all come down to nonviolent action. Every single one of those examples, the reason that we have not annihilated ourselves or built more is because of usually some form of direct action, but always nonviolent protest and persuasion, non-cooperation. I do know that ICANN has a week of actions coming up for divesting from nuclear weapons, which I think is a good pressure point to work on right now in terms of narrowing the funding for nuclear weapons. They shouldn't be able to get $1 for this work that they're doing, and they should be relying on only on governments, and then we should be pressuring them on that. It's a tricky one, and I agree with you that personally, I think right now with the compounding crises that we face, people start to shut down when they hear yet another terrifying story, and I can't blame them. So how do we disarm the fear so that we can disarm the nukes, I think is a great question for our movement.
Yes, absolutely. And my goodness, this is so hopeful and wonderful. And you just have getting groups to collaborate together, work together on different issues. And then of course, we all have the idea of peace in mind. A lot of us do. And I would say most of us don't want to live in a world with war. I'd say more than 95%. So yes, coming together is crucial. And those were all good tips. I love that. And we're going to be having a guest on our podcast from the Founding Mothers movement, and you'll hear more about that. And that sounds very exciting too. So it's all about peace and partnership, which we had Dr. Rian Eisler on, and she spoke about that. So coming together is so critical, and we can do this, staying hopeful. The fear thing, just kind of work it out. Don't be afraid, just help out. Great. So thank you again. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to send it back to Arthur. If you could take it away, please.
Let me ask you a quick question. Do you have time to run over, or are you on a tight schedule here?
I can go over a few minutes, yes.
Because there are a couple of wonderful questions in the chat that I just want to share with you. One is from John German, and he asks about the compelling documentation of stories of nonviolence, and he wants to know where there's a website or a place where people can see that all coming together. I remember back during when all the incredible nonviolent revolutions were happening, I said, my God, this newspapers aren't reporting this. They're not telling there's something incredible happening here. They're not telling the story because it didn't fit into the paradigm. They couldn't even see it. They're so blinded by the paradigm of the hero with the big gun myth that when it was happening right in front of their eyes, when the most powerful enemy we've been fighting for decades, ready to blow up the world over, started crumbling to nonviolent action, we couldn't even tell the story about it. The press didn't know how to tell the story. So how can we find those stories when put together in one place on the web? And what kind of funding would it take to be able to get that story out in a major way so people do know that story?
A couple ideas on that. I like the Global Nonviolent Action Database for a catalog of thousands of case studies in this. They all have rankings, so you can go to the ones that have the perfect 10 score, or if you want to see what we did wrong, you can go to the 2 or 3 score, failed movements. It's a great resource. You can also go to nonviolencenews.org and get on my newsletter where you can see what's happening every week. I share 30 to 50 stories of nonviolence in action. And there is a great documentary from the Meta Center for Nonviolence called The Third Harmony: Nonviolence in the New Story, which does a pretty good job of putting together many of the strands of the conversation we've been having today, from nonviolent peace teams to restorative practices to peace building work to nonviolent action. So I do recommend that. I don't know how much it would take for us to really burst through public consciousness with this, but I can tell you that, if we got 1/10 of the budget that is spent on Hollywood movies promoting war and violence, we would be rocking and rolling and changing our community, our culture.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end, because that is exactly what our mission is and what we're all about here on the People Powered Planet. And I'm going to show people where they can go for your upcoming days of action on nonviolence, and for incredible ways they can come together. So this is Campaign Nonviolence. What's your role in this?
I am the program coordinator for Campaign Nonviolence, which is an annual action week that stretches between September 21st and October 2nd, so the International Day of Peace and the International Day of Nonviolence. And thousands of people take part. We had over 5,000 actions and events last year already. We have 4,448 announced, and we expect many, many more to come in between now and September 21st. The goal is to build a culture of peace and active nonviolence, free from war, poverty, racism, and environmental destruction. So please go check us out. Everyone is welcome to join. If you feel like you fit under that big umbrella, we'd love to have you.
And I know Melanie's putting the link in there, and if you take a look at this, you can sign up. But here it is, September 21st to October 2nd. We'll be mobilizing across the country and around the world for a culture of peace. That's so critical, shifting the culture to peace, economic equality, racial justice, and environmental healing. This fall's CNV Action Days have over 4,600 marches, rallies, and other public mobilizing. So, wow, get some of these incredible books. Rivera, who is an incredible peacemaker, combining the storytelling with the practical ways you can get involved. So join us each week and every week on the People Powered Planet podcast. And if you enjoyed this program, please go to peoplepoweredplanet.com, which takes you to our club page, and actually sign up and join us. We continue. We're a nonprofit organization. We exist on your donations. And if you're enjoying these, I know several of you are members, and each month donate $10 to keep us rolling. People like Richard and a number of others here, Richard Denton. And anyway, I won't name them all because I don't have them all memorized, but please do sign up so that we can continue to bring you these great programs. There are costs for Zoom and other expenses, and we need your help to pitch in to join that. So, and stay tuned, because we also see Ozwem Assyrian here, and he is helping us, collaborating with him on doing these major mega meetings with top Rotarian presidents and Rotary International leaders. And we have an upcoming one that's going to be, stay tuned to watch for this, where we're going to be having one on and a podcast with Rotary collaboration with the Carter Center. Join us each week and every week on the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.